Tilda, let's experiment with a bit of a new op-ed format today, as noted by the op-ed tags instead of the usual TLDR, because I often find myself thinking about certain topics in rather some depth, and yet do not always find a suitable way to get those thoughts into a typical piece of content. So let's play around with this and see how it works. Somewhere to consider things a bit more philosophically and conceptually, as opposed to purely empirically, which, while I do enjoy my empirical data, it's also important to be able to simply make observations and consider new concepts in the abstract. After all, you must first make an observation about something if you wish to, in the future, go on to build a hypothesis, test, gather data, and then either refine or discard that hypothesis based on your findings. So, let's consider today the concept of analytical frameworks and the use of ideology in analysing data. What brought this on exactly? Why consider this? Well, you may remember not too long ago there was a debate, and I use the term loosely, between Sargon of Akkad and Christy Winters on the topic of whether or not feminism is a force for good. And in this debate there was one point that particularly interested me, and it was a moment when, to paraphrase, Christy Winters proposed that feminism is the framework by which we should analyse the interactions and effect of gender within society, because it has a wealth of information already available to explain existing observable trends relating to gender in society. She then asked Sargon to suggest an alternative framework that could work in place of feminism as an analytical framework for the study of gender in society, to which his response was to list off other areas of study, psychology, biology, evolutionary psychology, etc., as potential alternatives, especially since evolutionary psychology has already begun branching into the field of analysing gender interactions in society, and indeed sociobiology is also doing the same in regards to beginning to offer explanations of societal layouts in regards to gender. In today's discourse of gender in society, feminism is by far the largest and most used framework within which to analyse gender, because it has been concerned with gender for a number of decades, and as such has a lot of literature and has posited many hypotheses to explain certain trends, with some feminists even going so far as to posit that these hypotheses are in fact scientific theories that have been demonstrated and explained beyond doubt to the point where they are now accepted as objective fact. For example, patriarchy theory, privilege theory, etc. So let's today consider some alternatives that might be valid to take over from feminism in the future, and why. And to do this, I'm going to set these up as some examples of the oft-cited societal gender problem, and I use the term problem here in the mathematical sense, not the we need to fix this sense. The problem of the so-called wage gap, the gap in earnings between the aggregate of men and women that demonstrates that women, as a collective, only earn 77 cents to every dollar a man makes. Now, this fact, if you want to call it that, is not untrue. It is demonstrable that when you add up all the money earned by all men and then add up all the money earned by all women, subtract one from the other, then there is a difference left over. What this does not tell us, however, is how that gap exists, what is its cause, and it also has the unfortunate effects of being turned into a misleading soundbite. A woman will only be paid 77 cents to a man's dollar, which makes this sound as though this is a universal standard that affects all men and all women, which it demonstrably does not. Of course, once you take into account all variables that we know of, hours worked, holiday time taken, sick time taken, overtime worked, demands for flexibility, level of education, time of employment, negotiation of wages, etc., this gap vanishes in the majority of fields of employment, and in the fields that remain, the difference can be as low as 2 to 5%, which depending on age range can go both ways, in some cases favouring men, in others favouring women. It is not universal after all, and this gap's cause is currently unknown, but sexism could be a potential part of the explanation for some individuals. Unfortunately, that explanation isn't as punchy or catchy as a woman earns 77 cents to every man's dollar, but in this day and age, Who cares about accuracy when you can have a viral, dank meme-level catchphrase, right? So let's take this problem and analyze it through different academic frameworks. To start with, the feminist analysis of the wage gap, which I'm sure we're all familiar with by now. The wage gap is a product of a patriarchal society, one that privileges the male and the masculine over the female and the feminine. Within this patriarchal system, men's contribution is considered superior to that of women, and thus males exist within a privileged state, given societal advantage and favoured in regards to hiring, job promotion, and general social benefits such as not having to fear for their safety should they step outside their home. Within this system, women are simultaneously systematically disadvantaged or oppressed. Societal belief that women are not as smart as men, not as strong as men, not as capable as men, leads women to be disadvantaged in the job market and thus have their contributions undervalued or overlooked. Within this system, it is also necessary to note that women are effectively punished for having children, by being given no allowance for the toll this process takes on their bodies and the necessary recovery time, thus leading industries to further favour men over women owing to a perceived longer term of service and thus better investment. Now let us consider the same problem from within the framework of the libertarian free market. The wage gap is a product of the free choices being made by individuals within society. In a society where people are free to choose whatever career path they do so desire, it is unsurprising that trends should rise in regards to distribution of certain attributes. Women, on average, favouring and prioritising work that enables more social bonding, more care-focused careers with shorter and more flexible hours, allowing them greater freedom in their lives to spend time with their children. Men, on average, favouring longer hours, more technically minded jobs, and being more willing to work hours in jobs that are less comfortable and more dangerous. These factors explain why there is an aggregate difference in earnings between the sexes. It is interesting to note that the differences observable in gender gaps in certain professions in free Western nations is in fact larger than the gaps in poorer Eastern and Middle Eastern nations. This only serves to reinforce the notion that this pattern is a result of choice and freedom, since in non-Western countries there is less freedom and choice in job market and lifestyle, thus forcing more people into fields of work and study they would not undertake in different circumstances. Now let's play a bit of a game. Let's mix these two frameworks together and take on the wage gap from the perspective of a more free market libertarian feminist. The wage gap is a result of personal choices made by individuals within society. However, this society, being built on a system of patriarchal domination, places certain social expectations on men and women as to what a real man should do and what a real woman should do. While it is possible for people to break out of these societal gender roles and follow whatever career path it is that they desire, it is important to understand the pressures that the existence of these stereotypes place on men and women, thus effectively reducing their actual choice pool of career. And this fact, while disadvantageous to both sexes, is especially disadvantageous to women. While some women can rise above the pressures of patriarchal gender roles to follow whatever career path they do so choose, they often do so at the expense of other women, by internalizing the messages of a patriarchal society, thus leading to the further subjugation and oppression of women around them by perpetuating these harmful norms. This explains the existence of female millionaires, yet also explains the existence of the majority of women who fall below the average achievement of men. Let's now consider this problem from the framework of my own personal area of interest, evolutionary psychology and sociobiology. The wage gap is a result of a complex series of behavioral feedback loops between the genetic expression of behavior and the environment. Society, being at its base informed by the faculties of biology that humans possess, has come to be laid out in a seemingly logical pattern. The sexually dimorphic nature of the human species, males with an on-average larger frame, greater muscle mass, larger aerobic capacity, etc., and females with an average smaller frame, less muscle mass, lower aerobic capacity, and the biological necessity of a gestation period for their young, resulted in a historical division of labour between the sexes. Men taking the role of provider and heavy-lifting machine, women taking the role of nurturer and caregiver. It should thus come as no surprise that this division of labour feedback loop has reinforced an objectively measurable difference in the body compositions of males and females and aggregate differences in behavior. This division of labor was also a feedback loop of successful mating behaviors, whereby males whom provisioned the females with the most resources would be more likely to be selected for mating, thus passing on a propensity of behavior for females to desire males who could provide for them, and males who desired to protect and provide for females. This pattern of behavior in society has become adapted to the modern environment and expressed itself in men's propensity of willingness to take longer hours in more uncomfortable, dangerous, and harder, more physically and mentally demanding jobs that their physiology is better suited to, and results in women's propensity for favoring jobs with shorter, more flexible hours that offer greater social and emotional opportunities in favor of pure financial reward. So we can see that each of these frameworks offers differing explanations for the same observable problem. The issue we have at the moment is that we currently have a system in place where the feminist framework is the most dominant, controlling the majority of discourse on the topic, especially in mainstream media and politics. If we wish other frameworks to be considered, we must, I believe, begin pushing them forward, providing evidence for the reasoning at every step. Feminism is ultimately the juggernaut of gender discourse in society, with its massive back catalogue of studies and academic articles on the subjects of gender in society dating back decades. Many of their so-called theories, which are often nothing more than unsupported hypotheses and assertions, are backed up with often very little or in some cases no empirical data, or are based on interpretivist readings of any data that they do gather, based on the hypotheses and assertions of other feminist authors before them. The sheer mass of work that they have is a Gordian knot that must be cleaved in twain before it will begin to unravel. However, there must be something to take its place. Some of the observable patterns that feminism has noticed and documented in society do have worth and will need to be explained by whatever framework or indeed frameworks of study should move in to take its place as the alternative and hopefully better model of study of gender in society. I suppose to bring this to a reasonable endpoint, a TLDR as it were, empiricism seems to be the best weapon that we have on our side for those of us who are skeptical of feminist theory, most importantly manifesting this as better explanations for the observable phenomena surrounding gender relations in society. This has of course already happened in regards to the feminist claim of the wage gap, other feminist theories such as the feminist theory of rape culture, the idea that we live in a society that actively encourages and glorifies the rape of women, has been repeatedly shown to be empirically nonsense, since every single piece of data that feminists have ever presented in regards to their 1 in 3, 1 in 4, or 1 in 5 figures has always been shown to be of very questionable accuracy, mostly as a result of very small sample sizes, very poor response rates, or other problems in methodology such as the coders being the deciding factor in whether or not the person answering the survey was raped, and not the alleged victim themselves. So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen, just some thoughts out loud on the topic of means by which to study observable patterns in behaviour, and the necessity to not let one framework dominate discourse as it currently does. There are other academic frameworks and methods by which to understand these phenomena, and these should be explored and improved if our efforts to combat the misinformed views of feminism are to come to any fruition.